Okay.
Unless he's wearing his pin. Actually, the badges also are green. So if you got your there we go.
Why did you let me show everybody how I talk?
Yeah.
Okay.
I call the Charlottesville March 17th, 2025 meeting to order. Ms. Thomas, will you please call the roll?
Counselor Oshrin,
Present.
Counselor Payne,
Here.
Vice Mayor Pinkston,
Here.
Mayor Wade.
Here. Having established a physical quorum, council will consider a request from Councilor Snook to participate electronically. Councilor Snook, are you able to hear us?
Yes, I am.
All right.
I am in Ypsilanti, Michigan, visiting family.
Okay, are there any, can everyone hear Mayor, former Mayor Snook?
Yeah.
Okay.
Move to allow Counselor Snook to participate electronically.
Second.
Can we vote? Counselor Snook, it does pass, but if you can identify, did you, I know you said where you were, but did you give a reason?
Visiting family in
Okay, I'm
Ypsilanti.
sorry. Okay.
I
Based
can
on.
show you a picture of my granddaughter to prove
Yeah,
it.
no, based on compliance with the policy, we have the motion, and we have the motion passes, and now can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
I move for approval of the agenda.
Second.
And second, can we please vote?
And put me down as a yes.
All right.
Oh, we have to see your face when you vote.
Okay, yes. I will turn it off otherwise.
Yeah. Okay, this meeting will be divided into 3 sections. The first one will be a work session where we hear and discuss presentations that do not require a vote, followed by a closed session, and then the council will have a regular business meeting at 6:30. Today, we will hear a report on the Parks and Rec master plan. Mr. Anthony?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council, thank you so much for the opportunity. Before we get started, I'd just like to say thanks to the community. It's been almost 18 months that we've been working through this process, but the big thanks go out to the community. The community came out to all of our events, our community engagement, so I'd like to say thank you to that. Second, I'd like to thank the hardworking staff in Parks and Rec. As I said, at the time when we started in 2023, we were probably around about only 2/3 filled in terms of positions. So staff worked day and night to get us through to this process where we are today. So thank you to the staff, and if you do see our staff, please thank them too. They work tirelessly through this process. Before we get started introducing Mike, again, we went to the advisory board. As you can see, their comments and the Planning Commission comments has also been added into the draft master plan. And when I introduce Mike, our consultant, he will also walk you through the process of how we came here today, and then we will be doing the presentation. So, with further ado, Mike.
Thank you much. Mike Svets, Principal with Pros Consulting. Mayor, councilors, very much appreciate the opportunity to...
Keep going.
Okay. Very much appreciate the opportunity to kind of almost land the plane on the master plan, so to speak. And so tonight's agenda, there we go. Just to provide a quick overview of the master plan process. Understand responsive to Councilor Snook's comments earlier, just with regards to demographics and some of the updates that we have made associated with those. Alignment with other plans, the community engagement process, which you know is very involved, levels of service, connectivity analysis, cost estimating plan, as well as the goals for the project. So just kind of very quickly from a demographics perspective, we wanted to be responsive to the comments that came in this evening, or this morning, or over the weekend. Couple of things. We are using a Weldon Cooper number to represent the city of Charlottesville's population. We know that this is a bit different than what is reported in ESRI and the census. However, we know that Weldon Cooper is very rigorous associated with that process. In terms of the ethnicity, race, we just wanted to make sure we recognize that the community is going to continue to become more diverse. And also recognize that the largest age segment population is the 18 to 34, which is influenced by the University of Virginia. We have updated the language within the plan to reflect the fact that it is not the entire student body of the University of Virginia that's reflected in this number, but that there is there certainly is an influence associated with that. Additionally, we have also updated the population density numbers by planning area, and so we wanted to make sure that that is reflected. So all of this information is reflected in the updated plan, which we will provide to everybody following any other comments that need to be incorporated into after tonight's presentation. In terms of the, I think it's going to work. We're stuck.
Yeah, just say next slide.
I'm stuck. There we go. Okay. In terms of the overall master plan process, it is a 10-year planning horizon. We did really look at the investment in recreational opportunities for residents, as well as then understanding the unmet need and importance associated with those experiences. And the plan also is reflective of the investment and reinvestment in city-owned and or co-owned parks, primarily within the city of Charlottesville's borders. We did touch on some operational components associated with this plan, but we also will touch on those even further as we get into an implementation matrix with the department. Next slide. We also tried to make sure that there is alignment with a lot of the other current plans and policies. I will not read all of these to you. The one that has the most longevity is the Urban Forest Management Plan, which is, of course, getting updated at this point. But most of the other plans reflected here are within the last 5 or 6 years. Next slide. We'll take that one out. And then holistic and continuous engagement from a community engagement perspective. So I know that Charlottesville thrives on it being an engaged community, and there are a lot of different viewpoints to consider as it relates to parks and recreation. We made a significant effort to try to utilize 3 very specific overarching sources: in-person engagement, statistically valid survey, as well as the project website. This allowed for ongoing engagement throughout the entire plan. There were certainly some questions for us to address from the advisory board, which was to provide an overview of the in-person engagement summary. We had 33 different engagement opportunities. Nearly 2,500 folks are reflected in these engagements. They range from the framework plan sessions to large town hall meetings over at the Carver Center related to the master plan as a whole, down to focus groups, as well as presentations to you all and the advisory board. In terms of in-person community engagement and what that looks like on a map, You can see that we tried to take this show on the road. We did not make everybody kind of come to us, whether it be at council chambers, whether it be at the Park and Rec offices. We really tried to disperse and go where the community is at, and in particular around 4 very specific outreach events done by the department as well as other departments from the city. In-person engagement themes that came out, economic development through park reinvestment, that Parks and Recreation as part of the fabric of the community certainly draws people to the community and is reflective of a high quality of life. Reinvesting in the Parks and Recreation system is certainly a must. Increasing river access is something that came up repeatedly. The expansion of the shared use path system, the connectivity component, general increased awareness and advocacy, as well as outreach, and then sustainable funding for Parks and Recreation. In terms of community priority ratings, again, this is an overview. This does not necessarily break down into the household types and/or the planning regions associated with the plan. The way to interpret this, again, is the high priority areas are the components of the plan in which the community wants experiences expanded in those specific areas. Medium priority more or less means you have things that are right sized. The low priority are areas in which the community is very specific, targeted, specific age group, special interest, and or skill. Does not mean that you don't do them, but you're just not going to provide those activities and or programs and services everywhere. Next slide, yes.
Is the x-axis number of responses or some other value?
It's a value associated with combining importance, unmet need, and need reflected as part of the overall statistically valid survey. So it's just a scoring system.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sure. In terms of park level of service, I went one too far. Park level of service based on population. An old school way of kind of measuring how much of anyone or how well you're doing in terms of providing parks or experiences through amenities and facilities is to measure it based on a population standard. It's very old school, but it is still a way in which many agencies rate and rank themselves. You can see that in terms of the overall amenities and acreage, Charlottesville has a very robust park and recreation system compared to the median service level provided by agencies within populations of 50,000 to upwards to about 100,000. So again, this is not something that's should be understated, but it also is a recognition of the fact that we do have a pretty robust park and rec system in Charlottesville and do provide an opportunity for people to do a lot of different things without necessarily providing any one thing that is above and beyond everything else.
Can you hold that slide for a second, please?
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time reading the...
Yeah, sure, no problem. So,
So what is this, a current based upon?
Yeah, the current level of service in park acreage is approximately 45 acres per 1,000 folks in the community. And then the amenities are measured by 1 for every X number of population.
That's the medium?
The median is the tan in the middle there. And then the delta basically reflects the difference between what Charlottesville offers and what the median offers. And I tried to color code it in a way that says anything that was below the service level would be in pink. Everything in green would be above the median. You're above the median.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. In terms of level of service from an access perspective, this is another way to really start to understand how well you're doing. So very recently, there has been a huge push with regards to meeting a 10-minute walk to park standard. There's 84% of Charlottesville residents live within a 10-minute walk of a park and or school that is serving as a park. This is significantly higher than the national median for urban areas, which is 55%. But we also don't necessarily want to rest on our laurels. We knew that connectivity, we knew that trails, we knew that moving people in ways other than vehicles was going to be important to this community, which is why we did a connectivity analysis, which I'll talk to in just a second. Another measure of level of service, since this came up quite a bit, was to reflect in this plan, the Urban River Plan, that of course is also reflected in your comp plan. Right now, there's only 4 boat launches, as well as the Rivanna River Company's input site at Pantops along the entire Rivanna River. Starts up at Ivy Creek, and ends down kind of close to Riverview Park. The problem is that what has happened is people have created their own access points along the river. Some trespassing on private property, and also some that are certainly not what we would call formal in any way, shape, or form that creates safety issues. This plan did not intend to dive into this any further. So we want to recognize that from a recommendation perspective, and it is reflected in the cost estimating, that a true Rivanna River access study be done, but it also be done in conjunction with the county, in particular because there are opportunities where this opportunity would sit within the county. In terms of the connectivity analysis, again, the goals were to kind of identify shared use path segments, identify opportunities to expand it, as well as identify missing components, and then to prioritize them. There's an entire prioritization chapter on this. I think the recognition here is that staff has done a great job of really trying to identify opportunities over the last 15 to 20 years to increase the shared use path system within Charlottesville. Really not much of it existed at all beyond what was at Riverview Park, say 20 years ago. And so the system has been expanded. There are a number of components that are currently near construction. There are other components that are in the design phase. All of those are currently funded. What we have done then is identified, with the help of staff, to identify other opportunities to expand this shared use path system. And you can see that it is certainly spread throughout the community. These areas have all been prioritized using a multi-pronged approach to considering different factors, between the function of the trail to an equity component to what it was connecting, a feasibility component, as well as even just a land acquisition component. So there are a number of maps in the master plan that reflect all of the different stages of the shared use path system in the plan. In terms of cost estimating for capital improvements, we have a 3-bucketed system. One is just life cycle replacement. Another is expanding services within the existing park system, and the third bucket is the visionary bucket. This is meant to be guidance for future CIP planning, beginning with fiscal year 26-27, not the budget that you're about to adopt next month, through fiscal year 34-35. As mentioned, it does not include any projects to be funded through the FY 25-26 annual budget. We did not want to, at that point, kind of double count in terms of that. Just a reminder, your community, as part of the statistically valid survey, did recognize that basically about 67% of your community were in support of additional tax rate at a rate of 1 cent or more, or at least a minimum of 1 cent to expand parks and recreation services in your community. In terms of cost estimating,
That's one I would like to have printed out, and like put it in like a big map on the wall kind of thing. I'm being silly. I have a hard time believing when it comes down to practice that would hold, but.
I would agree as well, but I think that's where the random sampling occurs. Now,
Okay.
I will say, and I think this conversation did occur last time, is this was not said if you wanted Parks and Recreation versus you wanted public safety. It was simply a matter of, hey, you know what, if we improve the services based on the way you want things improved, would you support that? But they weren't necessarily given a choice. in terms of if you had one additional penny, where would you put that?
Yeah, I'm just teasing. So.
Yeah, but I do agree with you. I think further study would need to be done. You can't just take that as this is a blanket statement. Generally speaking, people are supportive of, funding Parks and Recreation. In terms of the cost estimating by bucket, this is where you start to realize that it's actually fairly well balanced. I know that at 57% of the projects, or 45 million, are the visionary projects, which makes up, in many cases, new paved trails and the investment in the framework plans. But for the most part, it is, kind of spread out between life cycle replacement, improving existing parks, and expanding primarily through the advancement of the connectivity component. In terms of just, again, looking at it from a timeline perspective, as we discussed back a while ago, about 23 million of this is in the next, shall we say 6 years from now, whereas the most of the costs have been backloaded to fiscal year 32, 36. This is not intended to, in any way, shape, or form, create any sort of pressure. It just gives you an understanding of recognizing that implementing a park and recreation master plan requires strategic financial planning, and therefore then did not want to create a bunch of pressure with regards to trying to do everything immediately. Yes?
Are the 32 through 36 years in today's dollars or adjusted for anticipated inflation?
Great question, great point. So everything in fiscal year 27 through 31, we have added a 25% cost escalator based on today's dollars. Everything in fiscal year 32 to 36 is a 55% cost escalator. And so these are today's dollars plus 25% for the first column, plus 55% for the second column, and then those total up to the grand total. The only other thing I would say is that it is not in any way, shape, or form intended that the city of Charlottesville, through 100% of taxpayer dollars, would fund all $78 million. There are a number of different funding strategies that can be accomplished, and we have identified those in the plan as well. A lot of the connectivity component will likely be funded through a series of grants, as an example. And then the goals, provide safe, accessible public spaces, meaningful recreation programs and events, prioritizing health equity across your community, ensuring that you have a diverse and dynamic workforce for Parks and Recreation, since it doesn't happen on its own. Innovative and lasting partnerships. I want to kind of hit the pause button on that one really quickly. Parks and Recreation has a significant opportunity to continue to be growing itself as a community community builder. It's a conduit for folks like the gentleman that just sat down to my left, and all of the organizations that in many ways, shape, or form, feed into the experiences that are desired by your community. And so Charlottesville, given the fact that you have a robust Parks and Recreation system, you have great spaces and places, can help facilitate those partnerships to advance things beyond just what staff could do. Environmental sustainability has been a huge driver of the park system for the last 20 years, continually communicating with the community and doing so in a transparent way. And what I mean by this is that do not wait for a Parks and Recreation master plan to outreach your community about Parks and Recreation. Ongoing conversations with the community are absolutely needed. Though a park system plan has a 10-year planning horizon, we know that trends around Parks and Recreation change. And they can change year over year, they can change every couple of years. So continuing to have that conversation with the community is really, really important, because it has an opportunity not maybe to change the physical side of your system, but possibly with regards to programs and services, and also how you leverage partnerships, which of course then can in turn leverage dollars. And then creating that financially secure and resilient operation. Ensure that every decision that you make understands the operational impact as well as the long-term life cycle replacement costs. If you can't afford that, or you don't think you can afford it, then don't do it. because it takes dollars to manage and maintain anything that you build, and you don't want to put something out there that in turn just doesn't feel like it's providing the experience that you want because you don't have the dollars to manage and maintain. Outcomes, all of this kind of gives you an understanding of where we're at. But again, 10-year planning horizon, feeling very realistic and implementable about this, and also trying to ensure that it's financially sustainable. Doesn't feel very aspirational in nature. The only thing else that I will say is, as it relates to community input and some of the decisions as it relates to framework plans, capital improvement, some of that was very well thought out in terms of understanding a specific park or a specific location and the micro community around it that it in turn serves. And so, though there are, in many cases, a lot of, shall we say, rolled up recommendations or needs identified in this plan, as we get into the truly engaged process, especially around the framework plans, there certainly was a lot of effort to recognize who the primary users of any specific amenity within parks were going to be. And so some of that is reflected in those framework plans. The only other thing that I will say about those specific framework plans is that they are just that. They're at the very, very beginning of any sort of improvements that would take place in any parks, further community engagement, further development of plans that actually would result into construction will be needed in order for those to come to fruition. The intention was to give you a starting point, but not to recognize that they would be the end-all, be-all.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the framework plans per park?
They were framework plans for the 3 parks and 1 grounds, which is Tonsler Park, Washington Park, and Market Street. And then we also did for Court Square,
So have a
but only
concept
Court Square
plan.
on the city of Charlottesville's grounds.
But then there would be the notion of a framework plan on top of that?
Those have pictures associated with them. Every park in the system has a narrative for capital improvement,
Okay.
cost improvements.
But you mentioned the term framework. What did that
A
mean?
framework plan?
Yeah.
It's a fancy way of saying it's more of a bubble diagram.
Got it.
But it doesn't get into measuring, shall we say, a concept plan, which would be, measuring the exact length of this
Sure.
kind of sidewalk within a park or something along those lines.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any questions, concerns, comments, suggestions that you may have?
Lloyd, we'll start with you. Did you have any questions?
Yeah, I have a number of them. First of all, let me say I had made the comments that I had made about the demographics in part because Charlottesville continues to have a problem when people look at Charlottesville because they don't know how to characterize Charlottesville versus Albemarle versus the metropolitan area, how to count the university. It's a familiar problem we run into every 10 years with the census, and of course it got even more confusing in 2020 with the advent of COVID. So anyway, it's something we need to try to get right. One of the questions that I had was a question that was raised in part because of a comment that was made at the Planning Commission meeting, and I watched the Planning Commission video, and that's the question of, again, a demographic question of somebody was asking, well, why are we putting in another cricket pitch? I don't know whether that it's been subject to anybody else's examination, but I know there already is a cricket pitch out at Darden Tow Park. I've seen people playing cricket out there. And I'm just wondering, because there was a mention by Mr. Anthony that 9,000 Afghanis were in Charlottesville just in the last few years, and I know we've had a substantial infusion. I've actually done a little bit of work with some of them, but we haven't had 9,000 of them, certainly, and I'm just wondering whether we have either a reliable source for that figure, or do we know is that the Charlottesville-Albemarle metropolitan area? Is it specifically in the city of Charlottesville, or what? And I don't know whether that's a question best directed to you or to Mr. Anthony or what, but I'm just curious about that.
I can address the specific question about the cricket pitch, and this also kind of goes to the same similar question with regards to the tennis courts. The idea was for the inclusion of a cricket pitch was not to completely turn the athletic field there into a cricket field. It was intended to kind of create an opportunity for it to be multi-purpose in nature, to recognize that there was a larger immigrant population within walking distance of that park. So you'd still be able to play soccer, you'd still be able to play baseball or softball. The idea was just to add that element. In terms of the Afghan population, I will allow Mr. Anthony to address that.
Yep, thank you so much. Again, as I mentioned earlier or later that evening, that was a mistake by me. There was an article that picked up 7,000, but it stated Charlottesville area. So that's yes, so I do apologize on that. That was me misspeaking.
Okay, I saw the initial comment, I didn't see the correction. Thank you for clarifying that. The broader question that I have, though, is we have a lot of parks that Charlottesville residents use in the county, and a lot of county residents use city parks. And I wonder how much planning we have ever been able to do with the county to have sort of a common goal of, all right, we want to have so many tennis courts. We want to have so many pickleball courts. And I mention this in particular because at the same time that this was being presented to the Planning Commission, we were having a meeting of the Darden Tau Committee, which consisted of Mr. Pinkston and me from the city, and Supervisor B. Lepisto Kirtley and Supervisor Ned Galloway from the county. And one of the questions we had was specifically what do we want to do with pickleball courts at Darden Tau Park, which is of course a jointly operated park, but it is in the county. I didn't see in this discussion, in this master plan, any discussion of Darden Tau Park. Of course, it's not technically in the city. I don't know whether it was a part of your charge or not. But it just emphasized to me, as we worked through that discussion, the need to have some joint planning and some joint understandings about how things like pickleball courts and tennis courts and so on will be apportioned. In the specific context of the pickleball courts, I noted that it didn't seem to make a lot of sense to have half of the pickleball courts or half of the available courts be pickleball and half of them be tennis courts, but in two separate locations. Why not have all of them in one location and all of them in the other of the other kind in the other location? And Supervisor Galloway basically said, well, one of the concerns he would have is that and this reflects ongoing issues between the city and the county, is that we don't really have any way of guaranteeing, that he doesn't have any way of guaranteeing the way that the city would treat these things in the future. And I guess that leads to the question of whether we need to be having some really more robust joint planning, even to the point of having some kind of a mutual parks authority or something like that, so as to be able to bring that degree of cooperation between the two jurisdictions to the point where we know that our citizens don't care whether they're going to a city park or a county park if that particular thing they want to do is located where it is. Why do we care that much? And maybe we ought to figure out a way to work together on all of this for everybody's benefit. That's my broad observation, and I will leave it to somebody else to raise the next question.
So, I'm not sure if you wanted to respond to that.
I would say that the scope very specifically was focused on Charlottesville residents as well as the areas in which you own and or co-own. So there is some recommendations associated with Darden Tau, but nothing that influences the number of experiences or different experiences with Tau, given the fact that the county does kind of drive the bus with regards to that. Or at least manages the site, maybe is the best way to say it. The concept of regional parks and recreation, certainly goes back to my time here as the director. And there has been, I would say, on a site-by-site, issue-by-issue opportunities where, conversations have taken place. The issue that you raised with regards to tennis and pickleball is a great one, because there are still 25.8 million people in the country that are playing tennis. Pickleball is now at 19.8 million. So the whole concept of, hey, we're going to take one from the other doesn't really work, because you have significant populations playing both. I recently did a tennis and pickleball court study in the city of Boulder for this very specific issue, to get away from the robbing Peter to pay Paul. Your point about Charlottesville residents don't care if the county's managing it, Albemarle County residents don't care if the city's managing it, is absolutely spot on. One of the survey questions was, who do you use for parks recreation experiences? The number one response for your city of residents was Albemarle County. Number two was Virginia State Parks. Number three was actually the city of Charlottesville. So that kind of gives you a sense of, hey, you know what? Your community absolutely taps into county parks, it taps into its own parks, and it taps into what takes place, outside of, even just Albemarle County. So I personally think that you have an opportunity, and maybe it starts with a specific study, a specific conversation, whether it be around athletic fields, whether it be around tennis courts or pickleball courts, whether it be around the Rivanna River, to be able to have a conversation that says, hey, you know what, we need to think about parks and recreation a little bit more holistically because of all of the understated, or all of the underlying sentiment in which people are just going wherever they need to go to get the experiences they want to get. I would say starting at a project level would start to leverage that kind of regional approach and leverage that kind of partnership, as opposed to trying to force it, at a park authority level, which I think would open up a lot of different cans of worms. That's my 2 cents, and that's reflective of my history here as well.
Can you remind me the sort of process of review? So we have a Parks and Rec committee or board, is that correct?
Yeah.
And those are folks that we appoint. And how many are on the board?
We have 12.
Okay. And so as part of all the work that you've done, you've presented this to them, and have they given their seal of approval on it?
Yes.
Okay. And then you've taken it to the planning commission. I guess that was last week. And it sounds like that conversation was a good conversation, but they also have given their blessing as well. Correct. Was there any specific or significant feedback that they had that might be worth talking about now, or was it pretty much like we like what we see?
In my opinion, what we heard from our advisory board and the planning commission, they're really, really impressed with the comprehensive master plan that was presented.
Okay.
That we have at the moment. There has been comments in terms of demographic questions, data questions.
I saw Councilor Snook's
Yes.
email about those pieces. so-
That's correct. So those things we have addressed, and we have updated the draft plan to reflect the planning and the advisory board comments.
All right, thank you.
And Councilor Pinkston, if I might, at the meeting, the motion was made, there were no amendments suggested to the plan, so it was pretty broadly accepted.
And this gets integrated with our comprehensive plan? Is that what we're looking at tonight?
That
becomes an amendment.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You have any more comments or
No.
questions?
No, except the pickleball discussion at the Dardentown meeting the other night was pretty intense.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was that close as far as the numbers in the United States, so.
Pickleball, tennis grew by 8% last year. Pickleball grew by like 36%. but they're very different sports. I think we have a tendency to lump them all together because they're played on a very similar surface in a very similar way. But a user of pickleball is exceptionally different than how folks play tennis. Takes 30 minutes to figure out how to play pickleball. That's a very sport that's engaged around social activity, whereas tennis is much more of a skilled sport. It's very social, but it's definitely not going to take you 30 minutes to learn how to play tennis well.
They can also do pickleball at ACAC. They do the courts there to do it during certain times, so it's...
Yeah, that entire conversation that we had in Boulder reflected private, public, everything to really give us an understanding. We involved the USTA, United States Tennis Association, as well as the United States Pickleball Association to help guide that conversation.
Natalie, you have any questions?
Yeah, I have a couple things. First, thank you very much for the energy that's gone into this. I attended one of the functions at Washington Square Park last spring and got to see how many people came out for that, and that was really nice to see. I have a couple of notes and a couple of questions. The first note is kind of small, but just as we build the more restrooms for the public, I would like to just note that this is one of those equity versus equality things. The same number of restrooms on the men's side and the women's side is not going to be adequate. So if we could just make sure we allot extra space for the women's side, that would help with the type of usage. And then generally a comment, some of the trails listed specify or noted a lack of tree coverage, so I just want to ensure that we're trying to get as much tree coverage on trails as possible as they're built. I know Chris is all over that, but if that's, just make sure that's in the plan. I know the connectivity with the county has been a big thing that people keep bringing up, and I think that is important to recognize and aim for, not just locally and immediately in our urban ring, but the 3-notch trail, if and when that comes to pass, which I hope we're all very enthusiastic about, that's going to involve connectivity within the city and the counties beyond that. So I think that is a big enough project that including it now in our master plan, even though it's in its infancy, in some nod to that, I think would be...
That actually is something that was brought up at Planning Commission, and we have incorporated reference to that plan as part of the connectivity analysis chapter.
Okay, excellent, thank you. I'm excited to see that happen. Another thing that I think should be incorporated, and it is a little bit, but not enough, and that is language supporting bikes. I know there was a little vocab lesson with like, this is what a pump track is, and this is what a traffic playground, and then there's a couple of those added, and in general, connectivity amongst the parks is something that is mentioned, but I want it to be one of our main goals, citywide and in this park plan, and I don't want people to look back and say, well, it wasn't in the master plan, even though it's something we can add later and can discuss more. I don't want that to be a fallback.
Okay.
As, it wasn't in the master plan, so we don't have to do it, even though we could.
We can take a look at advancing the conversation in the connectivity analysis with regards to the purpose of a shared use path. So a shared use path is intended, as the name is, for people to use in multiple ways. The idea behind that was for that it would be accessible and it would be multifunctional. So biking and walking and jogging are all intended for that. If there's a need for us to enhance that a little bit more around the biking world, we absolutely can do that. And so I'm happy to do that. But I want to be very clear that the shared use path is also intended, it's not intended to be a commuter bike path, for bikes. Solely. I've actually seen that, and I've seen that in the city of Calgary, where you have a recreation trail, and then next to it you actually have a commuter trail that is intended for people to ride bikes on just specifically, almost like a high-speed path. So that's the only thing that I want to be
Express
very
lane.
cognizant of, is that we're not putting biking on top of or ahead of, say, walking or jogging, because 1/3 of the country does walk for exercise, whereas about half of that does do biking for recreational purposes.
Absolutely. I can appreciate that there's a difference between the express lane and
Yeah.
the leisurely usage, but also we are land constrained
Yeah.
in a way that we might not have enough space for that if we are unwilling to take more space away from cars. And so in the interim, until we get to that point where people are more comfortable with that and people have made that mode shift, I think making, we get there by prioritizing bikes as not alternatives to walking or jogging, but as first choices over
Right.
especially cars. So if that's a little more explicit in here, I think that would be a great push forward there.
Sure.
And, people do both.
Yep.
Commute and
Absolutely.
recreate on their bikes. And so having that space useful for both, not just to get to work or whatever, but to get to the parks themselves, which kind of brings me to another point. On page 58, it's listing the differences between community park, regional park, and the community park is small, nearby, easy to walk to, and then the other two includes as amenities ample parking. And that is one of those phrases that kind of, my hackles raise a little bit at that, because if we are doing a better job at connectivity, I can leave my front door and bike to a park that's not within walking distance or would be a longer walk. And so I wouldn't need the ample parking that park provides. I know that, speaking in my experience, other people have mobility issues or bringing a lot of stuff with them. But if more people are showing up on their bikes or by walking or jogging there, then that leaves enough space for the people who have to drive. And so I'm just, ample parking that sounds too broad to be progressive.
I can say right size parking. And I think your point of what you just brought up is exactly the challenge that we always run into when we talk about parking when it comes to community parks and regional parks. A best way to describe like a neighborhood park is that length of experience is 30 minutes to an hour and a half. And people aren't usually bringing anything with them, right? They're just going to the park to experience whatever is provided to them. Community parks, regional parks start to become a 3-4 hour, potentially all-day experience, and people are bringing stuff like sports equipment and so on and so forth. And that's where the challenge always runs with, hey, making sure you've got enough parking to support people that actually have to bring a bunch of stuff with them in order to experience what you're telling them that the park is intended to experience. So there's always this kind of balance between getting people to parks in different ways, but then also saying, this is the experience we're asking you to provide, and we need you to bring a backpack, we need you to bring gloves, we need you to bring hats and all the stuff that comes with even just doing a picnic, so to speak. So it's those kind of things that we have to find the balance. I would say that the design guidelines are just that, they are design guidelines. And I think every community is a little bit different in terms of how it interprets those. Your point about ample parking probably makes it sound like more parking than you need. So we can think
Makes it
about how
sound
to kind
parking
of
forward
rephrase
instead
that.
of park
Yeah.
forward. And,
Yeah.
if you pave over the park to provide parking, what's the attraction?
Right,
So
exactly.
that's something I think we need to keep in mind.
Okay.
Because it also plugs into our general citywide kind of shift towards multimodal accessibility. And,
Right.
if everything else is making that move but parks, that's not ideal.
Yep, understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then it was nice to see that 84% of people live within a 10-minute walk to parks already. That's lovely. And to be so much higher than the median there is,
It'll actually go up even further when the city does the park out in the Meadows neighborhood.
yeah, excellent. And then I know that, so I attend the Bike and Pedestrian Advocacy Committee, or Advisory Committee meetings, and I know that a list of suggestions was circulated to BPAC a couple months ago from our city's bike ped coordinator, and I'm wondering if you all saw those recommendations and how you were incorporated or responded to them.
Yes, we have incorporated many of Tony's comments into that,
Okay.
yes.
Great. Thank you. It was a long document. I haven't finished going through it, so I wasn't sure how all of those were addressed.
Probably not everything, but simply because this is not an update to the bike ped plan. It's the Parks Master Plan that has a connectivity component to it. So I don't think we can overwhelm a Parks Master Plan with starting to expand it and have it feel like a bike ped plan, because that wasn't within our scope. I would say that where we could appropriately incorporate the comments that he provided, and he sat on the steering committee as well
great.
of staff, so he has provided comment along the way.
Yeah, I think one of the memorable things for me from those comments was places like the pump track or the traffic garden or other
Correct.
areas where young kids can learn how to properly ride and navigate on a bike.
Yeah.
And if that's something, again, we're trying to generate that mode shift more, starting young is the best way to get people comfortable with that.
Right, exactly.
And again, if you look at our outcomes in terms of partnerships, we are not talking about partnership outside of the city, but we're also looking inwards. And that's where we have a partnership with NDS, with Tommy, for example, that has a mobile pump track. So we are partnering with him right now, looking to see where that can go to kind of bring the community out, to tell them, hey, we have a workshop or we have a clinic. So we're also looking at partnershiping within ourselves with different departments.
Great. And that, the mobile pump track is cool, but the ones listed in here at Azalea and McIntyre would be permanent, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
You said a pump track?
Yeah,
What's
it's,
that?
okay, it's kind of like a skate park, but for bikes.
And it's dirt.
Yeah. And so it's like hills so instead of like pedaling, you're like, the motion of you going up and down on the bike on the hills kind of keeps you going.
So isn't that what we called back in Georgia a BMX track?
BMX track is a racing track.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is,
Very different.
yeah, a little slower speed, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brian, there's actually a Google question that pops up. What's the difference between a BMX track and a pump track? And the answer is not very much.
Okay.
And I'll say the pump tracks, if you look at them online, I was curious about it too, because I was not familiar with the concept, that there are pump tracks where you can, they're wooden, or some of them are wooden, and you can take them from place to place and put them in different places. In other situations, they're asphalt or concrete or permanent fixtures in some way. So
Or
there are a
dirt.
lot of different choices in how one decides to do a pump track.
Cool.
Yeah, but it's like a little more activity than flat.
The one thing that intrigued me was the notion that going up and down would provide enough energy to, it's sort of like almost the definition of the logically and physically impossible perpetual motion machine. There does in fact have to be some significant input of energy into the process. And so in that sense, it's good exercise.
You have any more questions right now?
That's all for now, because the Riverview parking lot is not in here, right? Yeah, so I'll save those for later. Thanks.
Michael?
Just as a quick comment, I would agree with others on the point of, even as I read it, it sounds like the perceived demand for some facilities like tennis and baseball is going down, but I hope we don't take that to eventually reduce those facilities significantly, because I think there's always just going to be something different about like public access to it as opposed to needing to pay for it, even though I know there's a tension between, pickleball and tennis, for example. But in terms of questions, like I have like a process question, like as an example, we adopt this document, let's say residents in the Meadows or like we want to begin a process to activate that park in a specific way. Once this is adopted, kind of what does that process look like?
Yeah, so once, especially for the park that or the land that we acquired, what we will do is we will do our internal engagement, where Chris, our park planner, will have a series of engagements with that community. He's asking specific questions, since it's such a small park. What amenities would you like to see it? Would you like to have it just be a passive park? Would you like to have a piece of equipment in it? And trying to engage with the community. Once we have that plan done and written, from there we'll go into the implementation stage, where we will either, i.e., if it's a playground that the community really wants, or they want a soccer field out there, or passive, we'll put in benches, and we will start implementing that strategy.
And I guess similarly, and maybe it's the same, in this plan, it has more specific plans, obviously, for Washington Park, Market Street Park, Court Square Park. There's a lot of elements that are still up in the air about what implementation of that would look like. What is that process going to entail once this is adopted?
So it will follow a similar process. Number one, it will be up to the pleasure of the board that decide which park you want Parks and Rec to move forward. From there, we will then have to do a Pacific master plan and really move it to a conceptual, as Mike said, conceptual design, in order to get to a construction docs, and from there, we'll be able to implement and start construction.
But we as council, we need to allocate money for a master plan to get to the specifics.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I said this last time, and I know this is beyond the master plan, but I think it's important for council to be thinking about that as we approach the 10-year anniversary of August 11th and 12th, because I think there are important decisions we have to make in terms about if we memorialize those events in those parks, if we do, how we do it. I think that can look a lot of different ways, and I think should be done and can be done thoughtfully. But I think it sounds like that's a decision that we as council are going to concretely need to make in terms of both prioritizing funding a master plan and then giving direction in terms of do we want any public art or memorialization as part of that. It sounds like would kind of be the next steps.
Specifically for Market Street Park?
I think both for Market Street and Court Square Park, as well as memorialization of 4th Street, but obviously that's not a part. But I know that's beyond the master plan. But yeah, I mean, as others have said, I think it's clear, a lot of care and feedback went into this, and I think largely reflects the importance of our park system and just how it connects with pretty much every one of City Council's priorities. And it is an enormous public resource in all kind of different ways. So I think, I think it does largely cover that. If I had to identify something where, I feel like maybe we could call it a more specific plan, I would agree with some of the criticism we've got email of around the Rivanna River in Riverview Park. I know it does call out a plan for increased access points along the river. And maybe that's not in conflict with the Rivanna River Corridor Plan and the Rivanna River Basin Commission, but just thinking about what that corridor could be in terms of a river district and utilizing the historic assets along it, including Thomas Jefferson's birthplace, the largest black-owned farm in one of the largest black-owned farms in Virginia that was black-owned throughout before the Civil War, during the Civil War, after. I think there's just a tremendous amount of potential there that I could see it worth council identifying. We want to do more than just like a study of access points. We want to think about fully implementing the Rivanna River Corridor Plan and turning this into something bigger. So I don't know if this master plan is in conflict with that idea, but it seems like it's not calling that out specifically, and maybe that's a separate action City Council needs to make. I don't know, but that's kind of the only significant thing that I thought maybe that could be a bigger priority.
I think our intention is to reflect, components of the urban Rivanna River plan within this plan, because it's very consistent with a lot of the community feedback. So we wanted to raise it from a recreational perspective in terms of how it fits within that bigger picture. I think our conversation is that, hey, whatever you choose to do in terms of improving the Rivanna River consider recreational access to water as well.
Right. No, and I would definitely agree with that. Again, I just hope if we do a study, maybe we elevate it, beyond just that as the goal. 'Cause
Sure.
I think there's even bigger goals that, even just in our Rivanna River corridor plan, I think we've set out as our goals.
Yeah. I think your point is I don't think we wanted to overstep
For sure.
beyond.
No,
beyond Parks and
I
Recreation.
understand.
On that note, I'm just speaking of river and accessibility, the river crossing over between Penn Park and Darden Tow is long overdue.
It's been a conversation for decades. It's getting close to the whole Meadow Creek Parkway, John Warner Parkway conversation.
So I just had Michael, you finish for now? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. I just had a couple of comments. One is kind of extended from what Michael was saying specifically about Riverview Park. Ironically, I have a mentee that lives on Riverside, and when he's having a bad day, I just kind of ask him like, how do you deal with your stress or calm you down? And he said he walks in Riverside. So I think I'm glad we're doing these things, but a lot of people just kind of go to get away and to walk and to particularly that one with the river there. It's really calm and soothing. So I know that a few weeks ago we had a project to restore the shoreline. I mean the restoration of the basin or something. I know that's something that we're considering doing to partner with the Rivanna River Alliance, I think, to for a grant for that. When this started, it seemed like years ago. My main concern was the input process, because we know a lot of times with these things we only get very active, the activists to kind of come out and they can, and I just want to make that we didn't just, say we're going to have public input, come to us. You all went to the public and you had a lot of different ways, and I heard about it and I know you got a lot of input, so I'm really happy with that process. And one of the things that Natalie brought up and that I was going to ask was about the ADA kind of process. And I know, Sam, you're coming up with a plan. I assume that everything that we're doing will be accessible to everyone, that we won't have to kind of go back and fix things up to, we're definitely kind of looking forward with that.
So we, ADA coordinator was a part of the steering committee as well. And what we included in the cost estimating plan for capital improvements was his recommendation in today's dollars for the amount of money that needs to be incorporated into parks, just simply from ADA perspective. So that has been at a 10,000 foot level incorporated into the plan as a cost. So again, that may not necessarily end up being a cost tied to parks, maybe something that's tied to ADA, regardless of whatever department is still city funding. But yes, that is the inclusion of ADA improvements is very much a part of the cost estimating plan.
And my last comment or question is, and it's kind of hits on one of the things that Michael did, but and that's kind of arts in the park. I'm thinking that once the what is the project at the Jefferson School, Swartz?
Into plowshares.
Yes, that that I don't know exactly what the projects will look like, but it might be several of them, and we may want to put them in different parks. And I just want to make sure that we may already have a policy or whatever for that, but I don't want to go back later to say, we need to create a policy if that's what we want to do, and maybe we cross that bridge when we get to it. But I see Lloyd's hand is up too.
That's separate.
Yep.
1 second, Lloyd. 1 second.
Okay.
So that is separate from this process. Mr. Freeze is working on that. You'll get more information in regards to an ordinance and a program around arts and parks.
Okay.
And not just parks, just city right of way.
Okay.
To be perfectly honest.
Thank you. Lloyd?
Okay, so I note that we are not here to vote on this, unlike the Planning Commission, which did have a vote to add it to the comprehensive plan, which prompts my general observation that there are a number of things set forth in the appendix of specific actions that are suggested for perhaps 6 to 10 years down the road that, although we might at some point want to incorporate this plan broadly into the comp plan, I would be reluctant to do so if we were necessarily adopting, as though it were the product of real deliberation, some of the specific things set forth in the appendix. For example, one of the proposals is in the years 6 to 10 out there to remove the basketball court in Greenleaf Park. There's another proposal to remove a basketball court from Northwest Park and replace it with a futsal court. And then remove a basketball court in Fifeville for a fitness court. I have no idea what a futsal court actually is. I don't know if anybody is actually playing it around here or wants to be playing it around here. And it's not the point of my inquiry at this point. I want to make sure that we are not, if we embrace the broad concepts of this plan, that we are not necessarily committing ourselves to the things that would happen 6 to 10 years down the road, which will not have been the product of detailed study.
Correct. I would say the reason that we are calling it a cost estimating plan for capital improvements is because you're not adopting a capital improvement plan for Parks and Recreation as part of this. The idea was we went through an intensive kind of park by park improvement exercise that incorporated a lot of different data points, and we wanted to be able to give you a cost estimating plan. We have to tie the cost estimating plan to something specific. Does that mean that that is going to happen? Absolutely not. It's just that it says, hey, you know what? Here are opportunities and ideas around which you can improve your park system as being intentional about incorporating and listening to the community, as well as staff, as well as other consultants as part of this. So that's why that document is specifically in there, was to support the numbers behind what you're seeing in terms of the overall cost estimating plan.
But this also leads to my sort of broader question. Was there some sort of background trend that you all were recognizing that caused you to suggest removing 3 basketball courts?
The information was such that you have so many basketball courts in your community, and those basketball courts have been in those parks for generations, and your community has started to become more diverse in certain areas. The idea was to reflect that diversity and activate the parks beyond what they're being activated now, because basketball courts just simply aren't being utilized at the rate that they were in all of your parks as they were years gone by.
Oh, okay. Didn't know that. Thank you.
So to Lloyd's question earlier, we are, as part of the business meeting,
We're
going to
voting later.
Yeah, so there'll be 1 of 2 readings for adopting this into the comp plan. Okay.
I have one smaller note that I just found in my notes from earlier. The Market Street Park has, the tentative plan has a plaza with decorative paving in the center. And then in the like analysis of the input themes is that we need more shaded areas and seating and picnic tables. So I see more trees going in around the edge, and there's the existing trees that are already there. A big open plaza has lots of ways to use it, but on any sunny day, it's going to be the worst place to be. Is there any consideration like a bandstand or a gazebo type structure or a pavilion where it's still flexible enough underneath, but there's shade built
The
in?
intention was to allow that space to function in all kinds of different ways. And for special events coming in, that portable shade could be brought in depending upon the event, the function, the experience desired, without locking yourself into a pretty small space of saying, hey, you know what? If you build that shade, well, now it limits your ability to use that entire space together. So there was some intentionality, and that discussion did come up to say, hey, do we provide something permanent shade here, or do we allow it to be something that functions at a multi-purpose level, that there are certain times of the year in which shade may not necessarily be needed, and allow the shade to be brought in as part of the special event. That was the intention behind that, and why we wanted to leave it a little bit more of a blank canvas, so to speak, so that it could just function in many different ways.
Sure. I think that might be worth putting let's check back in a little bit and see.
I think that's
Yeah.
certainly something that would be a part of that, as, Mr. Payne was referring to, that would be a part of the next phase associated with that master plan development.
Okay, thank you.
And the most fun part, I assume, for any of these master plans, as well as implementation of the ADA elements and certainly the longer-term goals, in future budget cycles, City Council would have to allocate, a significant increase to Parks and Rec's budget, correct? It's not, I think that's just good for us to be aware of as City Council.
I won't let you forget.
Both, I guess you're saying operational as well as the CIP?
Correct.
Correct.
And this isn't programmed into the CIP at all now.
There's $500,000 that is in the CIP for FY '26 aimed at the ADA barriers being prioritized. But the intent was that the team would have time after you have adopted this plan for them to get to work, figuring out what it is that they want to bring to me and say, this is what we would like to do in future years. Because as you saw in your presentation, 10 years?
10 years.
10
Fiscal
years.
beginning with
Yeah.
26, 27.
We have, this document presents an opportunity to invest in our parks over the next 10 years. And the question is, at what pace?
Okay.
Along with everything else that you have to decide.
I would say.
We've
if
got
I-
that pie chart about the taxes. So
I would leave you on this note if there are no further questions. Parks that are activated, parks that are used for the right reasons, parks that are productive, end up being parks that don't get used for the wrong reasons. I've talked to many of police chiefs across this country, and that one very simple statement holds true. So the investment in parks actually is an investment in public safety as well.
Good way of putting it.
Yeah, I hadn't made that connection like that before, but it makes sense if
Good
people
eyes
are there.
means
Yeah.
parks are getting used for the right reasons, yeah.
Yeah.
To your eye chart comment.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Thank you guys so much and your staff. And this is like, parks is like one of the most visible thing that we do as a city. It touches people daily a lot, and we want to get it right. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Appreciate your comments and questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sam, is this all we have for today?
This is your only
Thank you.
topic today.
Okay, I have a motion for a city council closed session pursuant to section 2.2-3712 of the Virginia Code. I move that the city council close this open meeting and convene in a closed session as authorized by the Virginia Freedom of Information Act as follows. Under Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A3 for discussion or consideration of the acquisition of real property for a public purpose and/or of the disposition of publicly held real property, or discussion in open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body.
Second?
Do we need to do anything special with Councilor
way.
Snook?
I assume somebody will send me a link.
I think we can talk about it.
Okay, yeah, okay.
He's already joined the meeting, so he's been given permission.
Got it,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, so we'll vote. Lord, do you?
Yes, for me.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're in closed session and we will return at 6:30. Thank you.
Thank you.